Welcome, Civicus members and partners, to our short but exciting podcast on the importance of diversity and inclusion within civil society. We have an amazing panel of guests today coming from Serbia, Tunisia, and Malawi. I myself am Dumi from Botswana. I am a Pan-African queer feminist and human rights defender that's a part of the African Queer Youth Initiative. Before we begin, this podcast is brought to you by Civicus's new platform, DIGNA, Diversity and Inclusion Group for Networking and Action. Please check it out. It will be an exciting platform for new discussions and changing the landscape of how we work in terms of diversity and inclusion. Let me introduce you to our guests. From Serbia, we have Biljana from FemPlatz. From Malawi, we have Jessica from Shut It Down Movement. And we have Weema from Tunisia, who's a part of the African Queer Youth Initiative. And we'll jump right into it. What does diversity and inclusion mean with regards to civil society? Biljana, could you share your insights?
Yes, thank you. Hey, hello. I'm Biljana from organization FemPlatz, which is a feminist advocacy organization. So we work on legislation and policy changes in gender equality, but we focus mostly on disadvantaged groups of women in Serbia and in the region. Well, I would say that for diversity and inclusion, that goes into really the basic principles of civil society. Now, the civil society is those that are changing the structures, of any institutional responses. It aims to change the power relations between, the institutions, the governments, the state, and the people. And of course, it stands for the respect of the rights of all. So if we as a civil society do not include all people and give them voice in every platform, then really we cannot say that we practice this basic principle of our work. Another thing that for our organization is really important, and that we see how it influences our work, is that diversity brings this really huge value of different opinions, perspectives, inputs that we get from really diverse group of women. For example, when we want to solve some, issue, we see inputs from women with disabilities. How do they see this problem? Whether this is a problem for them or not? How do they approach it? Then when we work with another group of women, for example, rural women or elderly, we see their perspective. And then we come to really creative solutions to some problems, which probably we as an organization could not have seen if we did not include really diverse group of women in all these discussions. So for us, besides, changing these power relations and, really valuing the basic principles of civil society, is also how to change internal structures of the organization, how to co-create and co-design programs and find the best solution from these really diverse inputs from various groups of women.
Great. Weema, please give us some insight, as Biljana had mentioned, with regards to some of the powers and structures, and these are like institutionalized things. So the policies exist, and there are certain mechanisms that speak of diversity and or inclusion, but how do we socialize diversity and inclusion in the workplace, in the work that we do in engaging communities, or in human rights work?
Thank you so much, Dumi. Hello, everyone. My name is Weema. I'm from Tunisia, and I'm with African Queer Youth Initiative. I'm an LGBTIQ+ activist, and African Queer Youth Initiative is a youth-led leadership organization. So our work focuses on developing the skills of young people from all around the regions of Africa. I just wanted to go back a little bit to your question about diversity and what it means to civil society, and then what it means to us in our work. I think that what it means in a simple sentence is acknowledgement and recognition of everyone as a way of rejecting all sorts of discrimination. Like civil society to us is a reflection of the society's issues, concerns, and needs. And this reflection, if we talk about it, should be as diverse as society is, and should include everybody's voices to make sure that all needs have been addressed. In our work with African Queer Youth Initiative, we try to do this as we have members from all around the regions, from all around Africa. with different gender expression, gender identity, and sexual identity. And we try to give the space to these people to express their own point of view from different backgrounds and with different stories, and bringing them back in one space for all of them to have the ability and to have the power to share these stories with everybody as sharing experiences with the rest of the team.
Great, thank you so much. Jessica, what insight do you have with regards to diversity and inclusion, particularly when we're looking at the power and the structures that are prevalent in civil society?
Hello, everyone. My name is Jessica Mandanda. I'm from Shut It Down Movement in Malawi, which is a women's movement pushing forward inclusivity and intersectionality against gender-based violence. So our first launch activity is that we're going to have a march demanding presidential affirmative action against gender-based violence and all forms of violence against women and girls. Inclusivity and diversity for me I feel like it is something that in a lot of human rights work hasn't exactly been highlighted, where different projects and different interventions have been brought in. However, they were not addressing inclusivity and diversity, where we had, for example, in Malawi, we would have interventions and projects that are addressing women's rights, but they were only targeting a specific group of people. And a lot of institutions, especially civil society, were looking at women's rights from a gender perspective, and they were not taking into account the different needs for different groups of women, and would find that in all those interventions we're addressing certain needs of women but neglecting a lot of other needs for a lot of other groups of women. So for now, our movement is trying to address all the issues of intersectionality and inclusivity, and we're trying to bring in all different groups of women in Malawi to come together and address all the issues that each group faces, so that we can put all of those demands into our overall demand for affirmative action.
And so now I'm going to shift gears a little bit. Biljana, maybe you can share some insight in terms of the successes, in moving from surface level commitments to practical and real change. What does that look like?
Okay, yes. So what we see in most of the civil society organizations, at least in our region, is that now they're becoming more committed to this whole concept of diversity and inclusion, and many of them are starting to create diversity and inclusion policies. What we think this is like not the right order of things, how to do that. It's first of all, you have to really gather a group of people or gather a group of women that you want to, and then to create a really diversity and inclusion policy. Because if we first create a policy, then we're doing it again from the top to the bottom, without real participation of diverse groups of women. So what we did is we basically gathered, first we talked with the different groups of women and make sure that we do not see groups of women as homogeneous groups. For example, when we talk about women with disabilities, we tend to, societies tend to see them as one group that has similar obstacles and challenges and the similar or same needs and interests, which is really so beyond the truth, because within this group of women there are those who are elderly and young, and they have different really interests and needs. Those who live in the rural areas or urban areas have access to education or not. So they really, and then those who are really completely excluded, such as women with psychiatric in psychiatric institutions. So we tried within the groups to get as much feedback as possible, and the real involvement of them. What does it mean for you, to practice and to really put gender equality in real life situations. Then we moved to another group, and then like rural women. Then we talked to young feminists. Then we really got a lot of valuable feedback and completely different opinions about the same issue. how do we communicate with them? What type of language are we using? Most of the women told us that we really speak in really complicated, this like technical or expert or NGO language that really do not relate to their everyday life. So this was really one of the things that we have to think through as an organization, how to change that in order to really ensure that they are actively participating. What we also put in our like this policy, diversity and inclusion policy, is that if we cannot organize an event, like a simple public event, which is not accessible to all women, we will not organize it. That means that we really have to make sure that venues are accessible for women with different types of disabilities, that they have accessible transport, that for women from rural areas who are really distant from the big cities, that we can ensure that they come and that they feel safe in this place. So if we cannot make sure that everything is in place, then we will not do it, because then we really cannot say that we are practicing inclusion and diversity. And I have to say that this is working in our case, but it takes really a lot of effort and it takes a lot of resources from our side. But I think that this really shows, this is like an example also for other civil society organizations, how not to forget different groups that we are advocating for.
Great. And Weema, I mean, it's very important to sort of highlight the fact that there's certain experiences, and with what Biljana just said in terms of, the different subgroups and issues that might not necessarily be addressed with regards to the current trends. What do you think are like the best practices in terms of, ensuring inclusion as we know it in the mainstream, to include subgroups that wouldn't normally be considered, particularly because they're not in the decision-making room?
Yeah, well, if we talk about, for example, the case in Tunisia, if we see it in the most perfect thing that we could achieve talking about inclusivity and diversity, that would be including women and LGBTIQ plus community in panels and in decision-making process. But the problem is that when we think about this, we sometimes tend to forget some other groups, some groups. For example, if we mention any queer Muslim person, you will not be able to have any representation of those people in any decision-making process. And they're not there because, again, having two things, being queer and Muslim and from a Muslim country, like the society is still not okay and acceptable of this. Maybe one of the best practices that we could do, even if we cannot have those people present and here, but at least bringing the subject to the table, at least starting to mention these groups, to start like giving the space to others to think about these, to include them, even if not in the process making, in the decision making, but at least include them when we're thinking about anything, include them into the discussion. And I believe that if we start doing this little by little, people start admitting that and acknowledging that these people exist and that we're not really as inclusive as we think we are.
Yeah. And then, Jessica, how do we put a youth lens to this? Particularly because when you're looking at the Global South, and even, more specifically when you're looking at Sub-Saharan Africa, young people are the majority, yet they're not necessarily included in, considerations for diversity and inclusion.
I'll give a specific example of Malawi, where young people have not been included in a lot of decision making, have not been included in a lot of policy making. But when it comes down to demanding for accountability for such issues, we are then told that no, in the initial discussions, there was a representative. However, that representative is not representing the entire youth population in Malawi. So as of now in Malawi, there are a lot of young people who are coming up with their own organizations and their own initiatives, and they're contesting basically the older generations and the policymakers to say, you cannot make a decision for us without us. And this has come up in there's a youth manifesto that a lot of organizations came together and realized that there's a need for youth inclusion, and there's a need to identify the young leaders and bring in their diverse initiatives. So, for example, there are initiatives for young mothers who have been brought into the decision making. There have been young people living with disability, young people living with albinism, representatives from the LGBTIQ community, and they've been bringing them into spaces where they can interact with policymakers, and they've been given the opportunity to contest some of the decisions that, for example, the government has made on behalf of the youth, to say that this is not what the youth want. And if we're going to go forward in regards to any type of development for the country, the youth have to be at the forefront of it. And when it comes to inclusivity, it is mostly the youth that are speaking about it and demanding inclusivity and from our leaders. And I can say that almost every youth-led organization or every youth-led initiative is putting first inclusivity before they strategize for any form of action. So I can say when it comes to inclusivity, it's mostly the youth, which I think is a good thing, because we take up majority of the country's population, and we're pushing forward inclusivity, and I think we've gotten a good response so far.
Great. Weema, I'd like to imagine yourself as a decision maker that's sitting in a humanitarian organization. So you're dealing with emergency situations, and the priority is like basic necessities. So that is shelter, food, water, and access to medical care. What do you think is the top priority in safeguarding diversity and inclusion within your programs?
Thank you, Dumi. Just before replying to your question, I just wanted to go back to what Jessica said, saying that the youth are the ones leading the movement where we're talking about diversity. I think it's because the youth have had enough. Giving the example she said, the government making decisions instead of youth. We have a lot of the government, for example, in Tunisia, they always do these panels and conferences, and their main subject is always about youth. But then when you see the panel, the people talking about these subjects, you will never find anyone younger than 35 in that panel, which is really, really funny and sad at the same time. Going back to your question, the first thing I might need to do is to look at the population I'm dealing with, because people in a position of power might sometimes think they know what's best for the people, and sometimes they might think they have more knowledge and more experience in dealing with these things and how to put a strategy in place and help people in a way. But if those people are not involved in the decision making, or those people do not express what they really need, we might miss the point, and instead of doing something good, doing the total opposite. So I would say the very, very first things to do is to see what the population need, what's a needs assessment or anything, to see how can we move forward. Yeah.
We always think that, and we always talk to international organizations that provide aid and with donors, that if you create a service that responds to the needs of the person who belongs to the most disadvantaged group, then the service will work for everyone, or mostly, will work for everyone. The problem, I think, with deciding about different services and supports that people need is that they are really general and they are basic, and then after some time we realize that we forgot to include these people, we forgot to include services and to adjust it to the needs of and usually these are women. Then when we hear about scandals such as women are at risk of sexual abuse or harassment, or cannot satisfy their basic daily needs. So when we have a service in mind that it fits the people who are most disadvantaged, I think that then we go the other way around, and then we can provide really more quality service.
Cool. And if you found yourself as the leader of a donor or grant-making organization, what would be like your top priority in ensuring diversity and inclusion that your officers would have to safeguard within grant opportunities?
Okay, so this is always a difficult question to talk about community when basically we are not donors, but what we try to do is to have really open the conversations with our donors, and what we try is to bring them the evidence, of what we have achieved and how we improved or changed our programs, so that they see the value in that. The thing is that this current type of functioning and relationship between donors and civil society is kind of difficult for, ensuring complete diversity and inclusion, because we do not have enough flexibility in our work. Now, some things or some issues may come up that we cannot just put on the table and say, okay, this is now the priority that we want to work on, because we are stuck in this circle of project management and things like that. But what we somehow talks about is that at least we should put forward diversity and inclusion policies in civil society organizations, but to ensure that these policies are co-designed with different groups within the society, not just to have a policy that just stand there and it's not used in everyday work. I think that this is something that we are moving with the donors in a right direction, but really how to put everything in practice is a more difficult question, because it takes more resources.
So now, given your experience, right, and some of these activities, what do you want that donor? You are in that donor's position. What is the top priority you want them to do when they're sitting and looking at a grant application, or when they're having a call for grants? How should they ensure from their position of power that diversity and inclusion is reflective with their grantee partners, particularly those that might not necessarily be focusing, or maybe even better, those that do have policies but don't implement?
I would say that we would insist on putting conditions that we work with really diverse groups of people, not to have a condition to work with the government, because there are really situations in different circumstances in countries where you cannot work with the government. So instead of putting that condition before us, it's better to widen this circle of primary constituents and really involving people and hearing their voices. And another thing would be to be aware of the additional costs maybe for providing all of that, and just be aware that the building a movement of women, for example, women with disabilities within feminist movement, takes more resources, and takes more time. So this would be another important point for us.
Fantastic. And then Jessica, if you were like a council of NGOs, how would you want to ensure that diversity and inclusion is addressed in an equitable manner? So as Biljana just spoke about the fact that there's a need for maybe more resources and time and possibly even consideration, how would you as a leader who has that power within that space make sure that all voices can be heard, and even from some of Weema's comments, that they can be even visible within such a space, such as a national council?
For me, I think I would start with inviting representatives of each group, so that I myself cannot represent every woman, because we are different. Women are very diverse. So I would bring in representatives, say from the older generation and the younger. And there's also, I think another group that is also forgotten is that there's another generation in between the older and the younger. I would bring in representatives from each group so that we sit at the table and we can figure out what each group needs, and so that we're not leaving anybody behind and everybody is involved in the decision making. And me as the leader, I would take into account everything that is brought to the table, and just try to put myself in a position where I understand where everyone is coming from and moderate it in such a way that we come up with solutions for the demands and the needs for each of the groups represented. Yeah, I think I would take that approach.
Great. And I guess this is for everyone. How do we ensure that we can bridge some of, and in acknowledging that there's so many different subgroups, there's diversity, and that there's a need for intersectionality, particularly because of the challenges being faced in requiring solutions to be comprehensive. How can we bridge some of the different thematic areas and groups in a way that doesn't necessarily compromise the interests, but that can guarantee that we can comprehensively provide solutions in terms of diversity and inclusion in accountability, in governance, in advocacy work, and even in terms of the actual day-to-day meetings or partnership engagements and community mobilization?
Well, I would stress again this importance of really seeing how all groups are really diverse, within one group that we as a society tend to select, like women with disabilities or, youth. We have to really think hard and always be aware that this is not one group, that this is such a diverse and changing, dynamics within the group with different interests, different needs, different backgrounds, and different opportunities to participate and to, be in decision-making positions. So when we acknowledge that, and when we are aware of all these concepts different, and what we always see is that this being in a so-called disadvantaged group is a changing concept. It's not something that is stuck now and forever. When we acknowledge all of that, then we really can be always aware about the intersectionality of different and go really beyond thematic groups and just be dealing with the subject. This really, I believe, is a really important process, and it's a very valuable learning process. But of course, it's also very difficult because it relies a lot on solidarity, which is, in our experience, solidarity is not something that is given to us. And there is a kind of lack of solidarity within the civil society movement. So it really has to go into stages. For example, what we did, we took the opinions and problems of women with mental disabilities who live in psychiatric institutions, which is a group completely excluded and without any voice in our society. We had to bring their voices first to the disability movement, then to the group of women with disabilities to be appreciated and accepted, then to the feminist movement so that women's rights organization accept this concept and fight together for their rights, and then to bring it in the mainstream arena. So these are some of the steps, which now sounds really like easy, and they're not. I keep seeing in the previous period of these texts like 7 easy steps to be more diverse and inclusive, which is really, I think, a no-go for civil society, because this really takes a real commitment and real hard and dedicated work to ensure inclusiveness and diversity.
Yes, that was fantastic, actually. You really actually, what really rang for me is solidarity is not a given. And I think that is like really one of the underpinning reasons of why there's a need for a group on inclusion and diversity. Jessica, any thoughts on that?
We need to promote humanity above personal perceptions and personal beliefs. We need to put forth humanity in all human rights work and in advocacy, and we need to emphasize humanity, because again, I'll give an example of Malawi, where a lot of advocacy work, a lot of human rights work is lost in the midst of personal perceptions. And I think that's also one of the barriers for inclusivity, where people put what they believe first. So the personal perceptions of different groups is what they put forth before humanity. So I think we need to promote humanity and create accountability structures that are actually accessible, especially to the youth.
That's fantastic. Any additional insight, Weema?
Yeah, I just want to quickly add on all of that. That sometimes, like with civil society, we tend to forget that we are, in a way, privileged with the knowledge that we have, with the experience that we get. And maybe one of the things that we should not forget and we should focus on is understanding the background of having like the existence of these exclusive spaces to focus on understanding the reasons behind it, whether it's social, cultural, or any other reasons, and be really patient with our work. Like, understand our place and not be the ones like coming and saying this is how things should be done, but more trying to understand, be patient, and take everything into account.
In shifting gears again, could I please each have one recommendation on what to start, another on what to stop, and another on what to continue in view of diversity and inclusion in civil society? So maybe let's start with Jessica.
Continue challenging the systems and continue challenging the policymakers and challenging them to take up inclusivity and diversity. What we should stop, I think we can stop assuming that what one group of people needs is what all the other groups will also need. We need to stop assuming, and we need to stop assuming. What we can start is we can start not conforming to the traditional way of practicing advocacy and stepping out of our comfort zones and out of the box to find new ways that will cater for each group that is out there, and that will also cater to how our different spaces and the different environments are dynamic. And I think that's what we need to start.
Well, I think that we should start doing something with the feedback that we collect and that we got from people on the ground. It's not only about asking them what do they think, it's really bringing all these voices and their needs to the mainstream discussions and the arena. It's not enough only to ask for the feedback. It's important to do something with that and course correct your work and how you operate within your organization. What I think we have to continue, and I strongly we stand for that, is we need to really continue challenging all these power relations and structures and institutional settings that we have in our countries, and I see that we have many similarities, and really change this huge gap that exists between the people and the institutional responses and structures. And what I think we should stop is, I would agree with Jessica, to stop assuming that we know best just because we have some expert opinion or something from some feedback from people. And what we need to stop creating shortcuts for diversity inclusions. In inclusion, we need to stop making it as I said previously, 7 easy steps to be more diverse and inclusive, and really put a lot of effort and commitment in our work.
Fantastic. Weema, what should we start, stop, and continue within the lens of diversity and inclusion?
I'll start with the first thing that we should continue with. I think the first thing we should continue is continue the conversation. So having like seriously, because we do not talk about these kind of subjects as often as we should. So having these kind of broadcasts and people bringing the subject to the table and actually talking about it, and going now from the space that we're doing something, but really talk about it and asking the questions. What we should start doing is related to what I said earlier. Start working on grassroots level, talking to the people and see what the needs. See if there are any people that we forget about, any subgroups that we might not have thought about, and see what we could do to bring them to the table. What we should stop, maybe, I don't know if it's possible or not, but maybe stop relying so much on financial resources. Some change could be brought without really relying so much on money. And one of those ways and one of the tools to bring that change is having these spaces to at least start talking about the problems and the issues that we have. Yeah.
That is so powerful. What an amazing panel of so much insight and expertise and experiences, which I think are very, very valid and very, very important and must be amplified. And this is why the Diversity and Inclusion Group for Networking and Action exists, to start exploring some of these different issues and create an enabling space in ensuring that no one is left behind in the world that we want to create by 2030 and beyond. My name is Jimmy. I'd like to thank my panelists, Biljana, Jessica, and Weema, for such a fantastic talk. We hope you continue being engaged with DIGNA, and we're looking forward to future engagements.